Well, good evening. I'd like to call the City of Cape Canaveral Culture and Leisure Services Board regular meeting to order. Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Angela Trulock.
Here.
Mary Mosquera.
Here.
Kathy Parks.
Here.
Joel Fair.
Here.
Larry Holmes.
Here.
And Betsy Ronk.
Here.
Thank you very much. Public participation. Any member of the public may address any items that do not appear on the agenda and any agenda item that is listed on the agenda for final official action by the City Council, excluding public hearing items which are heard at the public hearing portion of the meeting. Ministerial items, for example, approval of agenda, minutes, and formal items, informational items, and quasi-judicial or emergency items. Citizens will limit their comments to 3 minutes. City Council will not take any action under the public participation section of the agenda. The council may schedule items not on the agenda as regular items and act upon them in the future. Is there any public participation at this time? All right, do we have any cards that somebody gave early? Great. All right. We have before us 4 action items, and the first one is to approve or amend the agenda. Has everyone had a chance to look at tonight's agenda? Yes, any action items or that you want to approve or amend to the agenda or add to the agenda?
I'd make a motion to approve.
Okay, motion's made to approve and seconded. All in favor of approving tonight's agenda?
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you. Has everyone had a chance to look at the minutes from last meeting? Any discrepancies with the minutes from last meeting? No? Okay, someone want to make a motion to approve the minutes?
Second.
All right. Motion to approve the minutes by Joel Fair, seconded by Mary Mosquera. All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Action item number 3. Molly, I'm going to turn it over to you to give some introduction to this action item. And kind of, we all have the book in front of us, but maybe you could give us the condensed version.
So here we are at phase, I'm not sure, of the fee review that we were asked by council to take a look at. And I segmented this one out by itself. I was originally going to include our ball fields and our soccer field. But once again, it comes back to that whole grant thing on differential fees. So I decided to leave these two kind of on their own because we don't really have any options when it comes to resident versus non-resident, profit versus nonprofit, or any other type of distinguishing feature about an individual or a group that would be using the facility. So as you can see from the revenues, these are very popular facilities. When it comes to renting them, most of our rentals happen on weekends. As you know, with the exception of the C5, the city isn't staffed on weekends unless there's emergencies. So when it comes to these rentals, these are for the entire day. These aren't hourly. They're not segmented where we have 2 people booking Banana River Park, 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening, because at this time we don't have the staff to come in, clean up after, or make sure that the guest cleaned up after. So unless the staffing situation changes in the future, that will be the standard going forward. I can only think of a handful of occasions, actually less than a handful of occasions, where we did not return the deposit or there was enough damage that would have necessitated a $150 deposit. So that's the current, and I didn't make any amendments to it. Obviously, that's something that you guys can consider as well. Both of these pavilions bring in quite a bit of revenue for the city, especially Manatee Sanctuary Park. Banana River Pavilion has always been a little bit smaller, and it's tucked away. I don't know if we could generate more revenues by promoting it a little bit better, because a lot of people, I mean, Manatee Sanctuary Park is a little off the grid for some people, and Banana River Park, due to its location and proximity, kind of tucked into the area by Puerto del Rio, is definitely off the grid.
You kind of have to know it's there.
You kind of have to know it's there. And sometimes when people call, I have to really convince them that it is there, because they're like, no, I don't see it. No, I promise. Just go around that corner. You'll be good. There's a pavilion, soccer field, kayak launch. It's all right there. But that's nice, because they're respecting Puerto del Rio's property. But other than that, I can answer any questions that you have. If you don't want to do any of the proposed fees, you can always make a suggestion for others or send me back to the drawing board. But it is up to you.
I just have one question. Have there been requests for use of the park on less than a full day? I understand the staffing issue, but if it meant renting it versus not renting it, if you were able to rent it at a lesser rate, would people, like, I guess what I was gonna say was, like, if somebody wanted it, but I don't wanna pay that amount for the whole day, because I'm only gonna use it for a birthday party, or, you know, some type of a get-together that would be short. You know, has that ever come up with people?
It has, and our easy answer to that is all of our parks are public. And when you're renting one of these pavilions, you're not renting the whole park, which means you don't have the ability to say, hey, cable guy, I know you're on your lunch break, but I'm having a birthday party over here. You don't have the ability to kick anybody out. The only thing that you have exclusive use of is that specific pavilion. So and I've always thought, I mean, just me as an individual, the 250 at Manatee, I thought was always a little steep. And in my efforts to provide good customer service to the people that are calling, I ask them what they're doing. And if it's something as small as, and the one lady, she opted to rent the whole park anyway, for a one-year-old's birthday party, I couldn't, in my mind, justify the whole $250 for the full day and all of that other stuff, when really the kids are going to be 5 minutes in front of the cake and the rest of the time in the playground. We tell them that the park is open to the public, and provided there is no rental that's taking place where they have exclusive use, they're more than welcome to go out and use the park for free. Because anyone can do that. You can walk in there tomorrow and have a birthday party, and there's no problem with that unless somebody has already rented the facility. So the only time that could be a problem for, say that was the route you opted to take, and we warn them, is that if somebody does decide to rent the facility, then they do have that right to exclusive use of the pavilion.
And that's what I guess I was asking about. Do you have requests for renting, you know, like half the day of the pavilion? I'm not saying the park, but maybe I mentioned that wrong, of the pavilion, like in the case of something like that?
No,
No, they usually are aware they have to take it for the whole day.
they're abundantly aware that it's a full-day rental. And most of them are appreciative of that, because it allows them to get there early, do their logistics, decorate, leaves margin for error and tardiness and all that other stuff. So giving them the ability to have the event for the entire span of the day and part of the evening is helpful to them.
Is there, just out of curiosity, is there anywhere that anyone can look to see if it has been rented, or something like that? So if you were like, well, I don't know.
The rec desk calendar has all reservations on it.
Okay, so anyone can see that goes into the rec desk. Well, that's good. 'Cause
Yeah,
then
and that was one of
well, we could just go use the pavilion because nobody's there.
Exactly. Exactly.
Do we still post that it's reserved for that day, the day of? Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. So
Does it have to be reserved in any amount of time prior to?
I think we
To make it onto the
require,
calendar?
I think we require 48 hours because we had a challenge when we implemented Rec Desk because we had never had the opportunity for people to do things 24 hours a day. So we would come in on a Sunday and find out that, or come in on a Monday and find out that somebody was trying to rent it on a Saturday for the Sunday, so we had to shut off that feature.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
Is there a cost to the city for somebody renting it?
The only cost is in the logistics and the staffing. Most people are pretty respectful. Very rare occasions have we had somebody make a mess and it required additional cleaning above and beyond, you know, the normal day-to-day cleaning. So there's really not any, it's just time.
So there's always normally somebody going to check on the,
Yes, because they get a key with the rentals, and in order for them to get their money back, we need the key, and then the person that checks in the morning, which is usually our maintenance team, reports back and gives us a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and then we go from there.
So you listed several here, and we have what is current, the current fee schedule. But do you have a recommendation from staff? Would you continue to recommend what we currently have? Would you recommend one of the other proposals?
I wouldn't want to, and this is kind of, the person that's gotten this training most recently is Sam, because Samantha's taken over the administrative side of the facility rentals, especially when it comes to the parks, is my prerogative with these is that I don't ever want to be the one that gives someone a bad experience at their wedding, their birthday, or their celebration of life. And that's kind of the top level of how I look at it. I don't see the need to raise it, but because it does bring in good money, and I was very surprised when I pulled the numbers and I went back even before COVID, because obviously you saw the spike with COVID when everybody had to do everything outside, and money was tight for a lot of people back then, but they were still shelling it out just so they could have that outdoor space here in the city. So I'm a, if it's not broke, don't fix it type. I would probably cringe at trying to charge somebody $300 for a small kitchenette that just has a microwave, a refrigerator, and a service window. But I also understand that if you don't put value on something yourself, then no one else will value it too.
Great.
So,
Thank you.
Do you know if the information that we got on the City of Cocoa, is that current for this fiscal year?
that came, we actually share an attorney with them, which is why this actually came back for the nonprofit. So if that is their current, I wouldn't imagine that he would send us an outdated proposal for that item, but their demographic use is very different, and I think it's really interesting how as soon as you add the word wedding to any of their rentals, they tack on like $500, which is about standard if you've ever rented chairs for something like that. So
No, I was just looking at, and I'm not familiar with all of their park pavilions, but.
they have a lot more complex level of,
Right, but I'm just thinking, Cape Canaveral is kind of pricey compared to what they charge for the size, I guess is what I was looking at. But if you're getting that pricing today,
it's hard to argue against it if it works and it's helping to, I mean, obviously this money goes to help sustain the parks and the general fund and everything else. So I wouldn't want to take away from it, but at the same time, I wouldn't want to overcharge somebody to use the facility, especially since we can't differentiate between a resident versus a non-resident. Because that was actually the original, if I remember the council meeting specifically, I believe she was Mayor Pro Tem at the time, Mayor Pro Tem Kellum was the one that said, you know, why can't residents get a break at the pavilions? And that's when we started digging into stuff and found the grant specifications.
Well, thank you, Molly.
You're welcome.
Any other discussion on item 3? So talking specifically the fees for Manatee Sanctuary Park, Pavilion Rental, and Banana River Pavilion Rental.
Right, when I take a look at the numbers, and this is the 1,840 you get for the Banana River Pavilion. The price you're stating, that's, people have only rented it 12 times this past year, or that 1 year? Divided by-
Yeah, it's not,
So,
it's smaller,
and I haven't gotten to the point where I divide the other one up, so that's a lot more use. at
a
the other one.
lot more use. And that's one of the things that I think the visibility of it, as far as, you know, it's a little hidden spot. Unless you're a kayaker, your kid plays soccer, you live in Puerto del Rio, you may not ever know it's there. So perhaps that's something that we can do on our end to better promote that, hey, we have another option. And one of the things that I did when I was on the reception side of this department is when somebody's making a facility rental, we're always very cautious and asking a lot of questions just in case, because you never know. Somebody might say, oh, I have a family reunion of 50 people, and it actually turns out to be a huge reunion, and they take over the beach. That actually happened.
The other place looks like it was rented 55 times.
See,
I got-
exactly.
I got 32.
I'm doing the middle one, the most expensive, the 13,000.
Oh, no, you
that
gotta
was
take
for-
8,000.
Oh, yeah, that's the total of the two
Okay.
together.
So just,
But-
Which is interesting, because that means that it's only rented 32 times. And there's if you wanna say, okay, people are only probably gonna do it on the weekend, there's 104 weekend days in a year. So that's interesting that we only rented it 32 times. I'd almost want to say maybe they're better off to drop the rate.
Could
I
be.
I would say the same thing, proposal A, or even reduce the Banana River Park one even more.
Yeah, I was in the department when Banana River Pavilion was built. I was an admin at that time. And Gustavo's pricing on that was, he based it on the occupancy of that pavilion. That pavilion was roughly half the size of Manatee Sanctuary Park, and that's where he came up with the $150 fee. So he dropped $100 off of it. But being that it's out of the way, it is smaller. And then Banana River Park has what I would consider, I don't want to say a design flaw, but it's a design flaw if you're trying to have a private birthday party there, because anybody else using the park will need to walk into your party to use the restroom. Because the restrooms are on that front side instead of
Right.
like Manatee, where they're on
Right.
the back side. And we always have to be abundantly clear, like, because like I said, the last thing I want to do is ruin somebody's celebration of life for wedding or anything.
That's a nice park, though, I like that.
It is.
And I think at Banana River Park, because I live right on top of it, I think there's always somebody in that pavilion. And I
Yes.
guarantee you, they're not paying for anything.
No.
I mean, all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, that one doesn't get as much traction, and then Also, as kind of a customer service thing, when people do inquire about that one, we tell them, you know, there are restrooms inside there, and if somebody walks by, they'll probably walk into your party. Soccer, when soccer's playing, as you can imagine, they kind of take over.
It is huge.
It is huge.
My
And
entertainment every week.
I bet it is fun to watch.
It is.
Because they'll just scatter. But
Especially the tiny ones.
Yes, and having the soccer field here, the pavilion in the middle, and then the playground right over here, I mean, it's the path of least resistance. So there's a couple, I guess you could say, negatives to Banana River over Manatee, so I could understand lowering the rate on that one to just encourage use.
I would definitely try to beef up the advertising for it, maybe, or, you know, so that people are aware of what it does have to offer. Or
Right.
maybe a map or something to show people how to get there, or I'm not sure exactly where you advertise these things and the amenities that they have.
Well, this one's going to come into its own, I believe, when the aquarium gets put in. Because one of the things that the aquarium has been talking about since day one, obviously, everything with that project is subject to change, because we all know what can change in 2 years with a project, and they're looking at a much bigger project, is that they're planning a kayak trail, and we're the first stop. That park would be the first stop. And that's part of the discussion for the estuary park that got kind of tabled this past year for financial reasons, because that was going to be another stop. So having that knowledge that this park is going to, whether we like it or not, get a little more attention and a little more traffic, especially in terms of the kayaking. I think that'll give us better exposure, and that's also something that we can market via our normal channels, but also through our community partners when it all comes to fruition and they're printing up their materials, you know, showing, you know, where the stops are along the kayak route. That'll be where they come into play to really help us get that word out there. And then I'm sure the port will be all about that as well.
Estuary Park is the one next to Columbia Drive? Is that the?
The Long Point.
Long Point, yeah, but close, yeah, the other side. It was going to be, it was where they cleared out all those Brazilian pepper trees, and I
Yeah.
think there was,
Columbia Drive there.
yeah,
Right.
or, yeah, end of Long Point.
Got to stop, they'll throw some money in to help.
See, I mean, more stops, the better, you never know.
Well, we have a couple proposals in front of us. Would anyone like to offer either?
And you can amend them, like if you
Right,
can.
and amend, yeah,
You can
because
say.
we've talked a little bit about amending those, so.
Yeah,
Mr. Holmes, did you have a proposal?
I think proposal A is good, maybe lower the Banana River Park one to 100 and leave the other one at 225.
Okay,
Is that,
I would second
okay. So we have a proposal to take the proposed A rates with the exception of changing the Banana River Park Pavilion to $100 for the daily rate. And then maintain Manatee Sanctuary Park at $225 for the daily rate. Any questions, further discussion about it before we take it to a vote? Okay. So,
or you
go ahead and,
propose we vote on, as you described it, the 225 and 100?
okay,
I'm making a motion.
yes. Mr. Holmes made the motion for proposal A, amended to $100 for Banana River. Ms. Rock, you second?
I'll second it.
Second. Okay. Will you Secretary, we call a roll for the vote, because do we have to call a roll for the vote when we do it like this?
It's helpful.
Okay. Secretary, we call the roll for the vote?
Okay. Angela Trulock?
4.
Mary Mascara?
4.
Kathy Parks?
4.
Joel Fair?
4.
Larry Holmes?
4.
And Betsy Ronk?
4.
Thank you very much. All right. That's item 3. We're moving on to item 4. Review and recommend the differential rate structure. It's, the subject reads like this: review proposed differential fee structure specific to nonprofit organizations at applicable city facilities, and request staff either revise the previous recommendation that we gave at the last meeting to the city council, or to move forward with previous recommendation without revision. Molly, would you give us a little bit of why this is back before us?
Yes, so this is kind of a due diligence item. I'm not one for rehashing things, but when new information comes up, it's kind of our responsibility to make sure that we at least talk about it. Cocoa, it's so hard sometimes because we get, the number one question we're asked, and it's actually the first thing we always do, is we look at other cities. And Cape Canaveral is so special in so many different areas. And one of the things that is special about us is that we're small. So when we look to developing bigger programs, or even something as basic as fee structures, we try to look at cities that are more like us than say, okay, let me go down and check out Fort Lauderdale. Now, Fort Lauderdale might have some fantastic ideas, but they are much bigger than us. And while they're, yes, Florida, East Coast, beachside community, they might need a level of complexity in their policies and procedures that could help us or could not help us. So when I spoke to the city attorney, and my question to him was, does this need to be a resolution? Because per city code, user fees have to be approved by council. So I considered a discount to a user fee something that should be approved by council, because now we're giving a differential rate, so council should have a say in that. So when I asked him if it needed to be a resolution, he came back with, yes, it needs to be a resolution, but I'd like you to look at this as well, because the way Cocoa treats it, and somewhat to how you were speaking to, not every nonprofit is the same. You've got your St. Jude's, and you've got your little local backpack school groups. You've got a whole array of different nonprofit organizations. And the purpose of this in the city of Cocoa was to ensure that the people that were using these facilities and getting this discount were the ones that were contributing most to the local community. So I brought it back to the board just for you to have an opportunity to see that there was, Ms. Hanson on hers actually distinguished some. She had 3 categories, one for recreation and city-sponsored groups such as our Little League and our soccer, and no changes would make to them. Apparently they used to have a softball association too. I wish we had that, but we're not there yet. And then they divided Cape Canaveral nonprofit organizations as a separate entity, and those not based in Cape Canaveral were lumped in with general public. So there's a structure to that. I don't know if you guys feel that we need the level of complexity of Cocoa, or to distinguish further, maybe on a smaller scale, between the different types of nonprofits. But I wanted to put it out there, show you how it's used in practice with one of our neighboring cities. And you can either stick by what you thought before, or send me back to the drawing board to come up with something that's a differential rate between the individual nonprofits if you feel that that's necessary.
Thank you.
Well, I thank you for bringing this forward, because after reading it, I thought it was very thoughtful of what they put into their categories, and also very equitable to the community. So I could understand why they probably would have passed this to be used in a community, because people would find it very equitable, as you explained. I don't think it would be hard for a smaller community like ours, let's say, if we were to want to adopt even their same categories or their same definitions or whatever, to manage, because obviously that's just what you put on your application of usage, and the people figure it out themselves, where do they fall. So I did feel that it was interesting that they put as the first category somewhat the same as, as Nancy Hansen did. Obviously, she, at that time, since the facility was just a small thing, just did it as a no charge. But if you look at their fee schedule, they really do get a nice discount if they're providing a service that's needed for the community and the residents. And the other thing that I thought was also interesting was that they specifically called out to be used by any school located in the city. So I thought that was also interesting. So in case it was, somebody wanting to rent the gym for additional basketball space or something like that for, whatever, or something like that, so.
And then part of that is we would also want to kind of draw our lines if we're thinking about something like that. In the past, when it comes to, and all the occasions I'm thinking of, it always goes back to a kid's sports organization or some other type of youth organization. And when it comes to our schools, even if it was the Cocoa Beach High School, I don't believe
We weren't charged anything.
you weren't charged anything, because those are our kids too. And that was the only thing that I could remember specifically athletic using, because where else can you hit a ball into a wall and not get in trouble for it? Sorry, I'm a big fan of that, because I wasn't allowed to do that as a kid. It's our kids. Now, another example of it where they were charged was Merritt Island Christian School has a tennis program, and at the time did not have a tennis facility. I'm not sure where they play now, but at one time they called our courts home, and they did a per player fee similar to what's done with the tennis leagues coming in. But it was affordable, nobody complained, it was a negotiated thing to make sure that they had a place to call a home court. And it didn't interfere with anything that we had going on, because they played, in the afternoon, evenings, and our tennis people, with the exception of our specific league play, like the 6 p.m.ers, these kids were in and out, right after school. They'd come and do their practice, or they'd come and do their games, and then they were gone. And we did charge them an hourly or a per player fee for that, but they were an outside school. We wouldn't do that if, say, suddenly Cape View developed a tennis team.
We charge Little League Baseball to do anything?
No.
For anything they choose to do in the city of Cape Canaveral, they would not be charged.
No.
They want to use the pavilions over in Banana River Park, that kind of stuff. It's
Yeah, I
as a
wouldn't charge them.
sponsor, Little League is sponsored by the city, right?
Very much,
Okay.
very much. And it's also the same with the soccer club, the Cape Canaveral Soccer Club.
So it kind of falls under the all nonprofit leisure programs.
Right.
Directly or
Because
indirectly.
they're providing a direct service program to our residents.
Right.
Yeah. And with Little League itself, that's been going on since 1965, so there's a really long history of that. I haven't found the beginning of soccer, but I will find the beginning of soccer.
Category 1 says any personal use by a COCO resident. Like, we wouldn't be able to adopt these because we're charging Cape
Right.
Canaveral residents for use. So, I mean, that's a pretty big discrepancy for us to
Well,
look
they
at that.
didn't, if you look at their fee schedule, though, they didn't give the leisure programs free, no charge.
Okay,
So they did charge them, but it was at a
Gotcha.
lower rate. So, you know, and so that, I guess, is how they could fit that in. That was my understanding of their categories.
got it.
And their demand, I could imagine where their demand would be maybe slightly different than ours. Not that ours couldn't get to that level, but for the most part, our rentals are either birthdays, weddings, even at the Nancy Hansen, and celebrations of life. Actually, recently, Nancy Hansen served as a backup location in case there was rain for a celebration of life. And then a couple of the local church groups. And that's the full scope of our rentals, both pavilion and our interior. We have a handful of HOAs that choose to use outside their location meeting location, but that's about it. So I'm not sure if COCO gets approached by maybe larger, more diverse groups than we do, just because of, A, their size and the amount of different facilities and types of facilities that they have. Because
Yeah,
at this point, we're only talking about 2.
Right, I feel like the categories might be helpful, but COCO is a completely different beast.
Very different.
With the amount of maintenance teams they have, with the amount of parks they have, with the amount of infrastructure required for all of their reservations, like, it's a different ballgame from what we're dealing with here, so.
I was actually quite surprised at the rate of renting the historic Porsche house, as long as it's not a wedding. I was very surprised at that one, because that's, if somebody does mess up there, it's gonna be more than a $150 deposit
Well,
to
that's
fix
why I was
it.
even surprised at the amphitheater and the rate and stuff, that's not bad if you fall into one of the city categories,
Yeah,
So, it's not,
see, I'm a resident of Cocoa, so I'm learning all kinds of new things about my own town.
What is this Cocoa Civic Center? I've never been there.
I have only been there on 2 occasions, and both were weddings.
Is it comparative to anything we have?
When it's dressed up, maybe, but it's a very dated facility. The one wedding I went to, the most recent wedding that I went to there was, I'd say maybe 2017, 2018, and it was just a big open room. They had round tables set out. I don't think the room was divided off into sections, and then they just had it was just the reception there. So they had the tables set out for food and drinks, DJ, bar, and then they had the bathrooms off to the back. So there really wasn't anything spectacular.
Is it much larger than this room, or?
It's probably about twice the size, maybe.
Think of what size?
It was hard to tell because I couldn't tell if they had maybe closed off a section of it, when they have partitions and stuff like that.
community meeting room?
Community center.
It is right next door to Taylor Park. And what I can say
Civic Center.
is that when I
That's
went into the
700
bathrooms, I was transported back in time to my elementary school that was built in the
It
40s.
says 700 seating or 1,200 standing.
I believe it.
That's a big place.
And that's
It's
huge.
big, and I don't know what all that comes with, because from the brief conversation I had with the bride afterwards, it seemed like they provided the room.
I also find it interesting, which is a thought, that on the weekend rentals, there's a minimum. Like a 3-hour minimum or something like that. Or a rate, a half-day rate versus a full-day rate, or 5-hour rate versus yeah. So, which actually is, nice, because you get a break. And many, if you're gonna have it for an event like you were talking about, most people are looking to rent it for more than an hour. So if you have an hourly rate versus a 5-hour rate or a half-day rate or full-day rate or whatever, and giving them a break, that's a thought, a good thought as well.
The only challenge to that would be being able to come in and do cleanup between, or we would just have to have the
Well, because right now,
policy.
you can just rent it for an hour or 2 hours, and then somebody else could want it later in the day. You'd really have to rent it that way, wouldn't you?
If we went to
Early.
a weekend rate to allow for multiple rentals of the same space, like at the C5, that's fine, because we have staff available
Well, and that's what I'm
that
talking
day.
about, more like, well, I think, not the park pavilions, because obviously we've already kind of covered that, so now we're back to what we
Just
talked
the
about
Nancy
last time,
Hansen,
Nancy Hansen.
the C5.
So and that's what is my question, is your staffing today, multiple groups could rent it in a given day.
Only on Saturday. There's no staff on Sunday.
There's no staff on Sunday, so what happens on Sunday if somebody wants to rent?
They can rent it, and that's the end of the,
So only
The
one
rental.
group can rent it,
yeah,
and they get charged what? For
the,
just
the hour,
an hour?
the hourly fee. No one's ever tried to just rent it for an hour on a Sunday,
No, I was
or,
just curious how you work in that with no staff there.
because they have a key release, and they go in and have their event, and then they lock up when they leave, and everything's on camera.
Well, for something like that, where you're kind of stuck with only one renting, then you should definitely say on Sundays, if you're gonna rent the C5, there's a minimum of 3 hours or something like that. Because
Mm-hmm.
otherwise, you have no clue how long they're there, because nobody's monitoring it. And
But we have the full capacity to monitor it from our phones.
But then you gotta go back and fight that out to say, well, we saw people still there, and they could say, well, we were just setting up and dropping things off, blah, blah. Whereas if they knew there's a 3-hour minimum and every hour after that gets charged or something like that, that might be more equitable.
It's up to you guys.
I'm just, because that's why I was asking about staffing. 'Cause,
Yeah.
If you're constrained by staffing, then you have to kind of sometimes think about that in regard to how you're going to manage a situation.
So our choices right now, Joel, I just want to make sure I understand. We're looking at this, and we are supposed to decide between using some of this or not using some of this, and just saying, we prefer what we decided last board meeting?
Yep.
Correct.
That's what we're doing right now? Okay.
Yep.
I just wanted to make
Yep.
sure.
Yep, you can send me back to the drawing board, and I can come back with a revised version highlighting any differentials that you would like me to focus on, whether it be a resident nonprofit versus non-resident nonprofit, or a, what is it? I don't know what some of the other ones, for-profit individuals. I mean, that's not really part of that, because we've already established those, but Yeah, you can either send me back to the drawing board for some other recommendations, or you can continue with what you recommended last time. I just wanted to make sure this got in front of you so that you had an opportunity to consider.
Real fast, there's two things. I did review the minutes and I missed this, but at the bottom of our minutes from last meeting, it says the motion carried unanimously 5-0. But I believe that, Mary, you were absent in the last one, is that correct? And I did not vote on the last one, so
Oh,
it would
so
have
it would've
actually
been-
carried 4-0.
Okay, so that's a, we'll
and
have
so we
to
need to-
amend that in the minutes.
Yeah, so in the minutes, that's incorrect.
Yep.
Yeah, so I just wanted to clear that up. I think that we, probably to, for the sake of moving us forward, if anyone wants to carry this as we voted last time, you can make that motion, and then we could vote. If it gets voted down, then we can vote on how we would recommend staff to go back and revise what we had suggested. But that's just a thought that I had.
Well, I think we can just even vote to have it revised and and send it back to the staff to do it. We don't have to
Correct.
vote to keep what we had.
Correct, I agree.
We would just vote to revise this based upon new information available to us. And I think that some of the, like I said, I think much of the categories, especially things like use by a resident and the differentiation of a city nonprofit versus a non-city nonprofit.
And how would you define those to further that?
Just as they have it here. Are they registered and established within the city?
Within the city?
Correct. Or are they registered, or are they registered in a different city and established in a different city?
So it's the address that's listed on the 501c3. Got it.
I mean, that's easy enough, that would be the easiest way for staff to manage it.
Right.
But then again, if this is all spelled out well on your application for rental, the entity renting it would check off what they have and who they are, or whatever. I don't see that it would be a difficult thing to manage by staff, provided they knew what documentation that the people would have to.
All right. Does anyone have a motion to make? Again, I'm going to recuse myself for the, I'll handle the voting, but I will not be
You're
voting.
recusing yourself because you're part of baseball, or?
No, because I am a pastor at the church that rents the C5, so.
Okay.
Well, I would make a motion based upon the city attorney's suggestion to look at other entities, to send it back to the staff to come up with other suggestions on how we might more equitably manage renting the space.
Okay. Ms. Rock, motions to send the proposal back to staff for revision, is that correct? Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
Okay. Secretary, will you call the roll for the vote on to send the proposal back to staff for revision?
Andrea Truelook,
For.
Mary Mascara,
Against.
Kathy Parks,
For.
Joel Fair. Yep, step back. Larry Holmes,
Against?
Betsy Ronk.
Or
Okay. So the motion passes 3 votes to 2 to send back to staff for revision. All right. That's all we have for action items, and we're moving on to staff reports. Mr. Mayberry.
We had completed the revamping of the baseball field. We had opening day this past Saturday, which to my mind was a rousing success. I got a lot of good, nice compliments from people outside the city about our facilities here. Since then, we have received, actually today, received the portable pitching mound, and it's in place out on the field. We set 2 foul poles out in the outfield, so it's really a sharp-looking field. If you haven't seen it, it's worth taking a ride by there. Our guys did a really good job on it. It's and they were not baseball guys growing up, so they did really well.
They demonstrated that today.
Yes, yes. As they stood on the portable pitching mound, and I said, guys, just get off. So Joel was there in the announcer's booth, and it was a good day all the way around. Had the bounce house there, splash pad, which we'll segue into now, is up and working. So we had a lot of happy kids and parents out there, and it lasted about 3 or 4 hours. So with the splash pad, we finished the underground repairs on the sewer line, or water line, not sewer line. That's completed. We've got the sidewalks repoured. Taking care of that problem also took care of the problem we had with the new bathrooms over by the baseball field. They are fully functional now, and we are working. We actually are leaving them open during our working hours, and that's right now is Monday through Saturday. And having them closed on Sunday. Unfortunately, we have to take into consideration vandalism. It's rampant in the city. Every time we try to do something, we have kids. It's always children that come by and try to tear things up. So we're doing this, but keeping a close eye on it so we're able to keep it up and running and available to the people that are trying to use it for the purpose it's designed for. The splash pad, I had finally got the company that did the install for us. They came out last week, and I took part in a 3-way conversation with a Serbian gentleman in Montreal, Canada, and he had me, as I was talking to him on the phone, had me taking pictures and texting them to him, and as I did a couple, he said, go back, and the electrical panel, the company that did the install did what the plans called for. It clearly says on the panel 40 watt or 40 amp breaker. And the Serbian gentleman said that's wrong. It should be a 60 amp breaker. So then he begins to explain to me that the smaller breakers and the filters down the line aren't getting the proper voltage sent to them, so they're not responding in the way they should for giving us accurate readings. So it's been an ordeal to find a 60 amp breaker that fits in there, but they found one yesterday. I got a phone call last night. They're supposed to be here tomorrow afternoon, pick it up at 3, and come out tomorrow evening and put it in. Otherwise, everything else we've been able to, and I use the word manipulate cautiously because it sounds bad, but we can manually go out there, and if we're taking the readings of the chlorine and the pH, and if they're not, if we know they're off, then we can go out and manually add chlorine or, other chemicals to balance those, and that will keep the splash pad operating. So it's up and running. That's where we are with that. Was there one other thing?
The difference between recirculation and reclaimed water.
Yeah, somebody posted on the, I believe the Facebook page, was it? Yeah, somewhere on the social media. Yeah, that we were using reclaimed water for the splash pad, and it's recirculated. And I had some lady call me last night, or night before last, and she was giving me all these biological enzymes, and what about this, what about that? Man, this is water, it's run through a recirculation tank. We got 2 huge filters that it goes through. We've got UV filters in line in the system. Anything goes out of whack, but the water is fed from Cocoa City water. It's a line that runs right out to the street.
No different than what's in your pool.
Yes, exactly.
For the fact it's not standing there, it's constantly being filtered.
Yeah, we have a 4,000-gallon recirculation tank that's over there, and it's a constant process. It takes about 30 minutes for the entire system to recycle. So, yeah, that's just the kind of thing we combat. And we've got, you see the pink meter box lids that are out there, and I could see where somebody might think, but I would hope that they would call us and ask rather than going on social media and putting that on there. And, if it's on the internet, it's got to be true. So then that takes up an hour out of my day answering phone calls. And like Molly says, trying to explain the difference between the 2 types of water. But,
What are the hours?
ma'am?
What are the hours?
The splash pad is on timers, and it's from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. right now. As we were discussing earlier this afternoon, as the days get longer, we'll adjust the closing time. But right now, it's 10 to 7, Monday through Saturday, and we're not here on Sunday, so we have it turned off.
And once the newness of it wears off and we get used to the behaviors to expect, because the behaviors that we're seeing right now are not what we want, nor what we would want to expect. Once we can kind of get in our groove and the residents and our visitors can get in the groove, because as all of you guys know, especially the ones that live in condos, our residents are very much the eyes and ears, and if they know what they're supposed to be doing, what's supposed to be happening there, they police. Our condo commandos, especially Puerto del Rio, is particularly vigilant, and we love them all day long. And until we can get, one of the, I don't know whether it was, once again, going back to design flaw, or they just didn't think about it. One of the challenges that we have with that is controlling the space. There's certain things that you can do within the space of a public pool or a public splash pad. And we don't have the capacity at this point to control that fully because there's no fence around it. So when somebody says, well, you can't bring that within 50 feet of the wet deck, I'm not sure, beyond having somebody stationed there 24 hours a day, I don't know how to prevent that. So part of next year's budget that I'm proposing is enclosure to go around it, not so much to keep people out, but just to be a visual barrier, like, hey, this isn't a place to ride your bike, and this isn't a place to wash your dog, and or for you and your dog to have a moment together, the things we see on our cameras. But
Joel, do you have a camera?
I don't need one. My kids tell me everything that's going on there.
Exactly. See, they are young community stewards in training, and
The good
eventually they can be our attendants out there. But once the newness wears off and we've got a breaker situation under control, I think we'll be able to accommodate Sundays. And one of the reasons that I say that is, if you look at all of the different splash pads, there's a couple of them throughout Brevard County. We're the only one that actually has a building directly in front of it that actually has people in it. Because the rest of them are just kind of out in the back 40 of a park somewhere. Titusville, closest building, I think, is the restaurant out at the pier, which obviously those people aren't interjecting into anything happening there. So we want to get ourselves comfortable with it and with what can happen there to protect the city. And then when we feel that it's, okay to either have it unstaffed or we get the opportunity to staff our facilities on the Sunday, then it'll definitely be open for all of those hours.
John, you said the bathrooms are open during operating hours, but that is the
Well,
C5.
Yes, when we come in the morning, the guys, Ian and Brian, go by, make sure they're open, unlocked. And then at night, when the C5 closes, they go, that's part of their closing procedure.
Okay.
When they go out to take the flag down, go by and lock them up. You know,
And that's
I
8
really-
to 8? Monday through
They
Friday?
go out around 7:30
Okay.
and we'll lock them up. You know, and I hate that.
Right.
I mean, we all do, but we just can't, you know, even when they were down because of the water lines over next to the splash pad, people still went in there and just demolished it, you know. They weren't able to be used, but they went in there and used them anyway, repetitively.
Or
And
shoved
that-
a whole bunch of paper towels down the
Yeah, and it's, you know, and then we got to tell our guy, hey, man, I'm sorry, but, you know, suit up, grab a PVC, get in there. But, you know, we have to put cameras everywhere because you can't account for it. And most of the parents here they don't watch their kids. And so we, you know.
Sorry about that.
No, your kids, no. Yeah,
Yours are fine.
yeah.
Yours
It's,
are reporting on all the other ones.
Okay, I was just making sure that I got these times down, because we get asked
I know,
all the time, and so if we can give some good information. And then, are you gonna post the times for the
Yes,
splash pad on?
it's on the website, on Facebook page.
Yeah, but Facebook said it was open a couple times, and then it was closed because we had issues, and so like, I would just,
That was because real time trying to catch up with.
Right,
With that,
right.
it was up and down and yeah.
but
I'm
if
the one
we
that-
put it on there, you know, we've got the one sign.
Right.
If there's something close by where we could post the hours, I think that would alleviate a
Well,
lot
it's on the
of,
side of the splash pad, on the sign, on the side of it. The hours are
Okay.
posted there.
great, perfect.
But once I get the
They're
fence
there with
put in, there'll be a lot
All the things
more
you're not
visible.
supposed to do that people do anyway.
Yeah, correct.
Yes.
As they ride by the sign on their bicycle or skateboard.
Yeah, we were required to, there's certain rules that the health department requires you to have, and then there's our rules in addition to those. And I actually had to redo the sign that I had created because it didn't have all of what we wanted to communicate on there as, you know, people that are running this thing. And they came back and they said, well, your letters need to be 1 inch high. And I'm like, that is the biggest sign in town. So we dulled it down a little bit, and I made the letters 1 1/4 inch high, just to make it ultra visible. And then I'm hoping that once we get our fencing around there, we'll have places that are more prominent where literally you have to look at this when you walk in, instead of riding your bike and seeing it as you pass by while driving your bike on the splash pad with your dog.
I had a lady out there Saturday that tied her dog to the actual pole that activates, yeah, and it's clearly there are no animals within 50 feet. And I explained to her, it was very polite, you know, ma'am, showed her the sign. I just went to the bathroom and I don't want to hear it. And I said, well, then you can leave and take your dog and leave. So she did. And then about 45 minutes later, I looked and she was back over in the same spot with her dog. But people just,
Yeah.
They don't care.
they don't.
They just don't.
They don't care.
All we can do is try to educate and post more signs, I guess.
I will, I'll give a couple attaboys. I heard nothing but good things from opening day. So fantastic job to your guys and to both of you. And then every time I go by the splash pad and when it is running, there are people having a blast in
Yeah.
it. So, thank you. It's beneficial to our community, so thanks.
Surprised you got the baseball game in. I thought all those kids be all over that thing.
Well, I was watching that morning because I wanted to see, like, because we had the movable camera angled right where the kids come into the thing, and for like the first about 30 minutes before, and I don't know whose daughter it was, but there was one little girl that was having the best day of her life because she had the whole obstacle course bounce house to herself and the splash pad to herself, and she just kept going back and forth between the two. She'd come through the obstacle
Didn't know
course,
what to
down the
do with
slide,
herself.
out the side, into the splash pad, and back around, and I'm like, best day ever. And she probably couldn't have been more than like 4 or 5, so. But yeah, it's, watching all of these projects finally come to fruition after talking about them and planning and, you know, getting discouraged and getting pandemic delays and everything, it's nice to see the fruits of the labor finally paying off.
Thank you. John, you got anything else for?
No.
Okay. Molly, staff report.
All right, so I will pick up, I might as well pick up right back out on the ball field. So we have 2 items on the list coming up for the ball field. One of them would already be underway, but the changes that we needed to make and the time frame we had to make them in regards to not doing an all clay infield and having the grass and all that, delayed us having the ability to focus our attention on the announcer's booth. Well, not only did it delay it, but it changed having a grass infield instead of an all clay infield changed the need that we have in that announcer's booth. In the press box, as I'm told that it's supposed to be called, the press box is upstairs, and it's maybe a chair and a platform for the scoreboard and announcing equipment, and that's all. Downstairs is a little more complex. In the past, especially when there was just a clay infield, they had a small Kubota tractor that's about as long as this bench here and not much wider. But that was always stored in that downstairs area. And then that space was also shared with odds and ends from Little League. And I think Gustavo used it as ancillary storage while we were waiting for the C5 to be done. You'll never have enough closets no matter where you are. So in looking at the design for a replacement structure, we had $200,000 in the budget for that. And now that we don't have to have a tractor, because the tractor only served a purpose if the entire infield was clay, having clay only around the outside makes the tractor kind of obsolete. Could we use it for other things at the park? Yes, but can we transport it there when we need it? Absolutely. So that eliminates the challenge of having people trying to serve hot dogs and burgers and chips in one side of a room and then a firewall protecting them from the tractor, fuel, and other equipment on the other side of the building. And we're squeezing this into like 10 by 15. So now that we've found the folks at Public Works were very generous with their space, and they will let us put our tractor over there for the duration. And now we can actually focus on getting what we want and what we need for the concession stand. So I'm looking at a couple different options. One of the things, I found a company that makes, it's prefab, but it's actually precast. It's concrete building, pre-done, just like the restroom facility outside, the new one, where they just drop it in place, or they take parts of it and drop it in place depending upon your design. And that's what I'm going to look at first, because that's the most solid option that we have. If you get really close to our announcer's booth now, and you kind of push the grass out of the way, you'll see that it's built out of recycled telephone poles. So a concrete building would be not just more sustainable, but also me coming from the Midwest, a concrete building is a safety thing, because you need somewhere to go when the tornadoes touch down. So we really don't, beyond having, you know, the C5 building, you want to go to your closest place if there's lightning or if there's worse. And I think a concrete building will be a better option for that if we can fit it within our budget. So those are the things that I'm exploring. Next up, and it's not this fiscal year, but it'll be coming with the next fiscal year, is to do a retrofit and have all of the lighting changed to LED as opposed to the high-pressure sodium bulbs that we have now. when I was doing purchase orders, I believe those bulbs were like 75 apiece. What are they now?
We can't even find them now.
Oh, even better, they're not there. So beyond the expense of running those bulbs, the challenges with them, if you've ever accidentally shut off one of those types of lights before and then had to wait because you actually needed it to be on, there's kind of a reboot time with those lights. Same with the old tennis lights, they were the same way. That's where I learned the lesson that you can't just go, oops, back on. Doesn't work like that. So that's something that we're gonna look at. What was originally budgeted for that was probably budgeted 3 to 4 years ago. So we're looking at 50,000, but it depends, obviously, things have changed. So hopefully it's a project that we are able to get into the budget for the coming year because those lights are expensive. One of the things that I've noticed as I'm getting myself more familiar with the different O&M costs, because things change from month to month, is that during peak season, and especially with the changes with FPL, we had the same usage of hours between November and December, and the December bill was $400 higher because of how FPL does their billing. And I actually had to have an FPL employee explain to me, because at first, my first phone call was, Byron, who has been using this field at night for the same amount of time that Little League, because the bill was the same as Little League during full season, which was between $500 and $600. And I'm like, I don't understand. And she brought it up in front of me and she circled, she goes, we have a demand feature in our billing. So when there's a higher demand, they charge you a higher rate. Just like back in the day with the long distance phone, if you called somebody after 9 p.m., you didn't have to pay as much. So it's becoming increasingly important for us to be as efficient as possible with a lot of these recreational spaces so that we can continue to not just you'll have better lighting quality, but it'll reduce the maintenance. It'll reduce how many times I have to send poor Ian, who's terrified of heights, into a bucket truck to go take care of these bulbs. And it will reduce our overall costs in the long run, and they last a lot longer. So these bulbs are particularly vulnerable to storms.
Is there any possibility that as we become self-sufficient at the C5 one day, we could power those lights with solar from C5?
We could look at it. I don't think the C5 will ever be completely self-sufficient. One of the things that was discussed at yesterday's retreat was the battery backups. You can never be sure with grants, especially when they're coming from a local source and not, a big,
Right.
funding agency, on whether or not you're going to get them. But so far, we're getting a lot of green lights for a battery backup for that. It's an alternative to a generator. Basically, we will never be able to run the ACs off of it. Elevator, probably not, but it will at least allow the C5 to become a resilience hub so that if the power's out on the island and there's people that need to charge their phones, their mobility devices, if they need medication to be kept cold, it's a centralized location for people to do that, and it's also a centralized location where we can distribute water, we can distribute tarps, we can do whatever we need to help the people that are either still here or just got back here, bounce back up and running. The Cape Center, on the other hand, because it's a lot smaller and doesn't have the amount of space and require as much energy, that one will be pretty much off the grid.
Awesome.
So, and then that's attached to the backup at the sheriff's office, where they're also talking about putting in some more solar panels. So we're trying to capture as much of our sunshine as possible to use it to our advantage, especially for times when the other power sources aren't available. Any other questions on that?
No, do we know when the Cape Center is going to open?
I've got that next on my list. So Cape Center, we are back to power again. We are waiting on, we were stalled out by FPL. FPL needs to get permanent power to the building. I'm not sure why we're not high on their list, but we're not. And then the last of the physical, like hardware building elements, they have to finish the floors and they have to find a door handle that we like that doesn't appear to rust. One of the things that came back to us immediately after they had installed the door handles was they appeared to be rusting, and the response of the engineer was, that doesn't rust. I'm like, okay, well, whatever you'd like to call it, it's not the right color, and it looks like rust, and I don't think this is gonna work here. And I actually, it's funny, when you notice something once, you start to see things other places. And I saw the exact same door handle on a bank in Titusville, and it looked the same. So clearly there's a product problem. But that's minor. The floor and the power is what we're waiting on so that we can get the building finalized and starting to do all of our punch lists and get the certificate of occupancy and start our processes. Meanwhile, I have 2 interns working on exhibits, plus myself and another staff member that are working on exhibits and starting to build our available programs. We've put out a couple feelers, had a couple meetings with Central Boulevard Art Association and some different residents and other, not residents, but neighbors, if you will, that are interested in doing different types of program and exploring options. Our poet laureate, which used to sit on this board, is chomping at the bit because he can't wait to host a creative writing class. So I'm gonna cross my fingers and say June, but I also crossed my fingers and said March, April, and 2020.
Okay.
So the bottom line is for me to get exhibits in there and to get any type of artifacts or anything like that that would be loaned or artworks, everything's got to be clean, everything's got to be the right temperature. For state-issued things, I have to produce light readings, humidity readings, and temperature readings. And if that's the state's standard for letting me use their things, that's going to be my standard for having other people let me use their things. Because I think that's kind of a by the book, and that's kind of what I want to do with that. So please, everyone, cross their fingers for June.
Will they be using volunteers?
We'll use volunteers in certain capacities. There's a lot of different things we can do over there that may not involve the same level of administration that volunteers, say, at the C5 do. One of our challenges is getting people that are A, willing, and B, that can pass the background check. Because mostly with the C5 stuff, you have kids. But sensitive populations include people that have disabilities, the elderly, and children. So when we're bringing somebody in to do volunteer work, they've got to clear all of those bases before we can bring them in. And even though the Cape Center is not going to be as maybe heavy into the kids' programs, at least in the beginning, as, say, the C5 is with a Little League and summer camp and all of that, we are aiming to be as inclusive as possible, so we do still need to cover all of our bases with that security element.
Okay.
So as we get our feet underneath us, we'll be able to develop formal positions for volunteers and especially docents. Those are going to be incredibly helpful for us in just the day-to-day operations. And because it's part of the mission of the facility is to be a kind of a beacon of community engagement. So volunteers are going to come into play. How heavily, I'm not sure at this point, but I'm hoping it's very heavily when we come in, and not because we need them, but because we want them.
Right.
So, like, we want them to be a part of it, not like, I can't get anybody to work Saturday. What can I do for you? So,
Okay.
yep, good things happening there. The plants are going in, and I was actually able, one of the things that I had promised to the Community Appearance Board was that at least one of the plants that I was wanting to install there was an endangered species and a pollinator. So, much to the dismay of some people, I didn't just continue the landscape of City Hall over there. So you're going to see a lot more colors, you're going to see a lot more flowers. And we were able to find native Florida lantana, which is a favorite of bees, hummingbirds, and butterflies, and it is endangered. So it wasn't the color I wanted, but I guess it's not for me, is it?
And I see the door in.
Huh?
I see the door.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Now you have an escape hatch if you need it. It's interesting to see how things are designed now as opposed to how things were designed 10 years ago. And it's a constant reminder to try to be forward-thinking in things, which luckily we're doing that with the Cape Center, and we did that in a lot of respects with the C5. Last project that I have on our list is Veterans Park. Finally, so many changes based on feedback of the community. One of the things that was kind of on the fence, even from day one when they approved it, was the presence of a playground on the space. And in working with some of our veterans organizations, and I was incredibly supportive of some of their ideas because I've seen how the park is used, and I see how the park is lacking in serving those purposes. And one of the things that we just kind of lacked overall, and this is going on feedback all the way from when I started with the city in 2014, we had veterans that had reached out and they're like, we want a place to just have like a little veterans jam session that's not in a bar, that's not in a smoking environment, that's, not going to interfere with somebody's pavilion rental. Like, we want a space for, us. And taking that into consideration, and then looking at the way our different veterans organizations utilize that park, whether it be for Constitution Day, Veterans Day, most recently the Vietnam Veterans program with the flag out front. And we've also gotten a lot of celebration of life type things, especially from local members of our veterans organizations, that instead of putting that playground in the space is still going to be there, but it's going to be a place that is kind of designed as a gathering spot. There'll be room for chairs. We're not going to do a riser or anything, but there's going to be a paved area in the front where somebody can stand with access to power. That was my thing, because there's never enough closets and there's never enough outlets anywhere. So we're putting power there so they can have a PA system and actually do formal presentations, recognitions, and it's a designated gathering space, so they're not all kind of standing haphazardly trying to sit on random benches around a big monument. It's an actual designated space. So between that, and then there's an adjacent portion of that park that butts up against I guess that would be the southeast side of the library. That is, you've heard me use the term sneaky swale, where to most people it just looks like grass and maybe a couple trees, but it's actually a stormwater management system that just looks like landscaping. The sustainability team went after a grant to turn that one corner of the park where there's kind of already a ditch there into an absolutely beautiful, highly functional, highly absorbent stormwater feature that will help with the central ditch. And the photos that if they can make it look half as good as their artist did, it will be incredible. When they first approached me with it, the shallow side of Molly came out, and I'm like, that's great. I'm all about stormwater management. I definitely don't want water going into people's homes, but if I'm holding a a celebration of life, or I'm hosting a veterans thing in this space right here, how is this space going to look in my pictures? And they're like, that's very valid, and I think you'll be impressed. And I was. So a lot of native plants, similar to what you see at Wagner Park. I forget what that grass is called with the floofy purple, I think it's called mully grass. So there's, fingers are crossed for that we'll get the grant. They already sat for the panel reviewed our application, and out of everybody that they were looking at that day, I guess we were the only ones that didn't get torn apart. So that's, when he came and reported that, that's a positive. We don't have it yet, but that'll be a nice aesthetic for the park, but also functional for that area and to help out with that, with the flooding that's kind of in those streets. We signed the deal for with the design team, and it will formally go out to bid early next month. So it might take us a little bit longer. Well, it has already taken us longer than we anticipated, but I think that we're going to get a finished product that better serves the needs of the people that are actually using that park, and those are the same people that built that park. So, and I think that's a little more fair than just putting in whatever they want. But that's all I've got. Any questions? Anything that I missed? Because I probably missed a lot.
There was one point where Civic Hub was coming under the cognizance of
Oh, yeah.
the Culture and Leisure Services Department. Is that still the case? And if not, can you give us an update?
It is. I'm not sure how I forgot that. It must have been a psychological block. So, as I presented it yesterday, and it took a lot of talking through with the city manager, as it was presented yesterday, originally the plan was called the Promenade. And the Promenade project, the scope of the Promenade project involved getting that lot across the street, demoing the building, and doing anything that we needed to do to get it ready for future development. So with that, the book was closed on the Promenade project with the demolishing of that. Since then, it's become an invaluable parking area for our events and definitely our pickleball. So it's interesting that the current usage may already be informing the decision makers, which is, our community members, our community stakeholders, on what needs to happen within that space. But now that we are kind of looking at it from the 10,000-foot view, is we have a lot more opportunities with that whole space than we probably previously realized when we were just looking at that little lot. So what is coming up for that is Kimley Horn is our design and our outreach team. They've done a lot of different projects, too many to count, and I believe they also submitted a bid to become the city's formal engineering team. Our civil engineer I have literally seen his name on every single park civil engineering drawing that I've processed, going all the way back to the 80s, decided to retire this year. So John Picard gave the city so many amazing things, but he's throwing in the towel. And Kimley Horn they're working on our Presidential Streets Master Plan. They did veterans, and now they're tasked with just the outreach and the design of the Civic Hub. So in the coming months, you guys will be looped into the outreach activities in different formats. What we've already scheduled with them, well, I say scheduled, what we've agreed within their scope is 3 different workshops. They're not counting the council introductory workshop as one of those, so we still have 3 coming up. And I'd like the first one to actually happen over at Nancy Hansen, but we haven't set the date because that's a majority of our current stakeholders. And then from there, we can start branching out to potential stakeholders, because there's people that don't play tennis, that don't play racquetball, don't play pickleball, don't walk their dog in the dog park, and don't utilize that for parking, that might have some input on what they would use that site for if there were different amenities there. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes. But everything that's going to be happening in the next, say, 1 to 2 fiscal years is going to be very much outreach and drawings instead of actually digging, because stormwater is going to be a major component on that.
Got
The
it.
capacity for stormwater under the tennis courts alone is over 700,000 gallons.
Okay.
And that's something that really can't be ignored when you have people 2 streets over that have water that goes into their house
Right.
sometimes. So, a lot of layers, a lot of outreach, a lot coming up, but I'm excited to be a part of it.
Awesome. Anything else for either Molly or John? Any other items for discussion?
No.
All right, I would motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned.
Sam?
Thank you.
No.